Okay, right. So on to the next thing then. Steve sort of teased ahead a little bit, but we've got some questions here from people who posted them in the comments, and we really like getting your questions. We did away with the midweek FTSE because it was becoming kind of cumbersome in a certain way. But that doesn't mean that we're not interested in hearing what you guys want us to talk about and doing some serious thinking about it and chatting about it and sharing our sort of thoughts and discussions with you guys. So let's kind of start with the one that sort of Steve teased beforehand then in that case. Sam Late, I think is how you pronounce that name. Sorry if I'm wrong about that. But who are the rising star investors, he asks. For me, as well as being a great stock picker and trend observer, they must have a good grasp of macroeconomics. How have they performed over the last 10, 20 years? And what do they invest in / what's their investing style? I love listening to interviews, he continues, with the all-time greats, many of which still outperform today, but I'd love to hear more about the young blood, younger than 55, let's say, and how they see the investing world over the next 50 years. I'm guessing, Steve, you've got Josh Tarasoff then written down as your name for this.
Well, I was thinking about the medium in which we actually... so yes, is the answer to that question. So before I go over to that. But the medium in which we sort of like interact with these investors has changed, I think. And I think there's a lot of good investors on Twitter that don't want to grow their portfolios to massive amounts. So I wonder if we've had that kind of that distribution of knowledge in the stock market has meant that we have lots of talented small investors that don't have the they just don't want to run massive funds, I guess is what I was trying to say. So yes, I've got Josh Tarasoff. I think Josh Tarasoff is the best sort of the young sort of under or around 40s kind of money managers. Outside of that, I was looking at Chris from the Seeking Alpha service, potential multibaggers. He's a really interesting fellow. He does some really interesting breakdowns. There's Leandro from Invest Quotes. He's an Italian, or it might be Spanish actually. I might have just offended him. Fairly certain he's Spanish investor. He covers a lot of European growth stocks, and he's really good and really hot on semiconductors and things like that. So he's a really interesting follower. And the last one was Eugene Ng. He's from Vision Capital. He's a young investor. He's on Seeking Alpha, and he might be on Substack as well. He's really good on Twitter because he does earnings breakdowns that are really easy to understand, and he explains in the next sort of 6 or 7 threads, what it all means, and he really does do a really good breakdown of everything. And his portfolio to me is very similar to mine, so I guess I'm naturally drawn to his stock picking. They're the sort of 4 that off the top of my head. There's obviously Paul Briscoe as well, but
is he under 55?
Not sure.
Yeah. Maybe pin that one just in case.
Anyone for you, Steve?
So I don't have anyone quite as hot as you had there, but I take your thought here that the people who are likely at sort of hedge funds and so on are probably a bit more trading mindset than we are and so on. But here's someone that I listen to a fair bit when they talk that we haven't mentioned on the show before, and that's a guy called Fabio over at Capital Mindset as a YouTuber. He thinks, I think, in broadly similar ways to me, which isn't supposed to be a compliment for him. It's supposed to be a reason that I find it easy to understand what he's saying. And he says the things that I'm thinking, but better than I'm thinking them. And I come away from all of his videos pretty much feeling like I've learned something. So I found him when I was looking for a video on a company called MVR, which is a US house builder that I've mentioned before. It's fairly thinly covered by Wall Street or general sort of, yeah, pretty much. And he had a really nice breakdown on them. He was a little bit more pessimistic on them than I was, felt they were slightly overpriced and so on. But it gave me a really great way into thinking how he thinks about businesses, how he works out prices for stuff. He is one of these guys who eventually, at the end of the day, will whack numbers into a spreadsheet and decide whether or not to buy it based on the numbers he's punched into a spreadsheet. However, what I like about him is that day is long, and that day involves a lot of reading before your very eyes about the company and what it does and getting a feel for how to understand it. And that lends, I think, some credibility to the numbers that he's whacking into his spreadsheet, rather than saying, most people think the numbers are going to be this, so I'm going to arbitrarily divide them in half and then complain this thing is overpriced or something along those lines. I mean, he is, to my mind, sensitive to the thought that when we estimate future earnings, we are supposed to be estimating them, not just writing low numbers because they're low numbers or something like that. So I've heard him talk about all kinds of things in all kinds of ways. He makes an awful lot of videos, for what it's worth, and I don't have time to watch or listen to all of them. And actually, some of them are more interesting to me than others, partly because some of them are about specific stocks that I'm not interested in. But he's someone who I think is a really, really interesting, I don't want to say under the radar because that's slightly cliche, but YouTuber I haven't heard many people talking about along the way. One other thing about him, Steve, you mentioned it, Eugene Ng, I think his stock picking is kind of similar to yours. Fabio, when he does his portfolio reviews things, I think owns a portfolio that is sort of half yours, half mine, but he appears to have bought everything at better prices than we have.
Right.
Basically. So it's everything that I kind of own and feel like I'm pleased about owning, but he bought them at, I don't know, roughly half what we paid for them, more or less. So that's my kind of youngish guy. I don't know how old he is, actually, for what it's worth, but I'm pretty sure he's under 55. Have a listen to him if you're interested in someone that I think is worth listening to in terms of style and approach and ideas and so on.
Very interesting. What did we have another question?